Salute. Wake up, people. Wake up, people. It's time to come out of fantasy world. It's time to come back from the Wizard of the Oz or Wonderland. It's time to come back down to earth, down to reality, down to common sense, down to logic, reason, down to tangible, factual, real life. People, start using your brain. Your brain. Don't use this person's brain, that person's brain. Don't go listening to everybody else's opinion. Have your own thought process. Have your own analysis and assessments of real reality. Try to look at things from a factual point of view, not a fantasy world, Black Mirror point of view, but a real life, what you can see, touch, hear, smell. Use your 5 senses that God gave you. And if you do that, then you can use your 6th sense. Stop believing everything you hear and believing everything that you see on the internet. Look, if you listen to this person or that person and don't listen to your own compass, trust me, you're going to find yourself in the reality that somebody else has painted for you. Errol Spence versus Terrence Bud Crawford is the topic of this video because Manny Pacquiao had his belts taken away from him, and from what I understand, Yordenis Ugas was elevated into a champion. First of all, you cannot make somebody a champion. You can't make someone a champion. Only a champion can make himself a champion. I don't care what title someone else gives somebody. A warrior and a champion cannot be a champion unless he himself has earned it. No one can anoint you a champion. It's self-deserving. It's something that you have to have in the inside. It has to be in you, not on you. So giving somebody a belt is not making somebody a champion. Okay? Now, all this conversation is getting mystified across the YouTube universe about Errol Spence and Terrence Bud Crawford and Yordenis Ugas. Now, I listened to somebody for like 2 minutes and I just couldn't listen to it anymore because he was going down this whole conspiracy theory that the whole situation between Errol Spence flipping over his vehicle was a complete staged event, a farce. And anybody that's following that narrative is being bamboozled, being hoodwinked. And people will lead you to believe that that's just the mentality of, guys like an Al Heyman, Kaiser Soze, who's pulling puppet strings and making everybody do the dance. It was all fake, phony baloney. Errol Spence really never got into a car accident. He was never really hurt. Digress. Have your own thought process, is what I'm telling you. Now let's just look at it from a warrior mentality. From we want to see warriors, we want to see the best fight the best. In order for the best to fight the best has to fight the best. Right? We have to determine who's the best, right? So when I look at Errol Spence fighting Jordanis Ugas, the warrior side of me says, man, I would really want to see him put Jordanis Ugas to the side. And even for the same for Terrence Bud Crawford, I would really like for him to put Jordanis Ugas to the side and fight Errol Spence. And Errol Spence should fight Terrence Bud Crawford. That's the warrior inside of me. That's that fighter. That's that gladiator. That's a bloodlust. That's the insatiable bloodlust of a boxing fan that just wants to see Mortal Kombat. But you have to think. You can't just look at it from that perspective. Because once you follow that narrative, that very primal narrative, you put yourself at a very high potential risk of starting to sound ignorant, uneducated, and dumb, period. Like anybody that's just going to say, we just want to see the best fight, the best, like this is going to be a backyard fight. And not want to look and explore or understand anything else as far as everything else that revolves around the pugilist, all the business. As soon as someone says business, you want to be like, no, let's. You don't want to look at the chessboard. You don't want to look at the different pieces on the chessboard. You want to play checkers. You want things to be simple. You want things to be elementary. You want things to be so basic that you can understand it. And the only thing that you can understand is the fisticuffs. And your mind can't absorb any knowledge past that point. Facts. Facts of the matter is you have to evolve. As a boxing fan, you have to do better. You cannot just say you just want to see the knuckles, the fisticuffs, the pugilist. It don't work that way. It has never, and it will never work that way. Period, point blank. So, with that being said, a chess move for either Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence will be to go fight Jordanis Ugas. Period, point blank. Now, Jordanis Ugas, he's not a soft touch. He's a tough customer. But there's 4 different blueprints already laid out for him to be defeated. So logic says Terrence Bud Crawford beats Jordanis Ugas. Logic says that Errol Spence beats Jordanis Ugas. Whoever fights and beats Jordanis Ugas, either Terrence Bud Crawford is going to level the playing field and have better argument for 50-50, or Errol Spence is going to put more on his scale. He's going to tip the balance to where he has way more leverage now, and he's going to be able to either demand with no shadow of a doubt 60-40 or even 70-30 or 65-40, however you want to look at it. But Errol Spence is going to have a lot more leverage with 3 belts. Period, point blank. Now, let's just cut to the chase. Who's going to win the fight between Errol Spence and Terrence Bud Crawford? I don't know. But who do I lean to? The same person I've been leaning towards the entirety of this whole time. Since the genesis of this conversation, up until now. Up until Terrence Bud Crawford proves me wrong, I still believe that Errol Spence is going to be victorious in the fight against Terrence Bud Crawford. And it's not to take away anything from Terrence Bud Crawford. It's not to go into this whole la la land, this whole fantasy world of Terrence Bud Crawford being trash and everybody he's fought is trash and his whole entire career is smoke and mirrors and smoke screens and sliding hands and magic tricks and you know what I'm saying, Bob Arum mastermind puppet string this whole stage for everybody just to be hypnotized by Terrence Bud Crawford. No way, no how. Period, point blank. The reason why I think Errol Spence beats Terrence Bud Crawford is because Errol Spence has fought in the welterweight division the tougher competition. And when I watch him fight and I watch the conclusion of his fights, I see the consistency of Errol Spence being able to defeat Terrence Bud Crawford. I see Terrence Bud Crawford in the welterweight division fighting more handicapped fights. Now, I don't want to go over the whole Jeff Horn, whether or not he beat Manny Pacquiao, Amir Khan glass chin, and Jose Benavidez shot in the knee, and you know what I'm saying, Kell Brook being past his prime, and Gitas Kovalevskis, the mean machine, having no name and no clout. It's hard to not go down that route because that's the obvious route to go down because that's the facts of Terrence Bud Crawford's welterweight career. But let's just look at it like this is just how I'm looking at it as far as because we can go at Errol Spence the same way. We can say Kell Brook was damaged from fighting Triple G. We can say that Sean Porter is not really even a boxer, and every time he steps up, he gets beat. He's lost his every time he steps up to the highest level, he comes up short. Danny Garcia, every time he steps up to the highest level, he comes up short against Sean Porter. He comes up short against Keith Thurman. We can look at Mikey Garcia. I might say Mikey Garcia was a small guy and coming up 2 weight classes. You know what I'm saying? We can do that all day long, comparing the resumes like that, negatively especially. I don't want to do that. I want to look at, to me, who was the toughest person that Errol Spence fought? And who was the toughest person in the welterweight division that Terrence Bud Crawford fought? And then you have to do a little bit of a triangle theory to see who would win between those 2 guys. So, in my opinion, looking at Terrence Bud Crawford's welterweight resume, you can say Jeff Horn was tough. But you have to say that Jeff Horn was a domestic level fighter. And his biggest fight, his best fight, was a very controversial win against Manny Pacquiao. Facts. So when I look at Jeff Horn, I don't say Jeff Horn was his biggest competition and his biggest fight. It's the fight that he won the belt from. But his biggest fight was against Gitas Kovalevskis from Lithuania, the mean machine. Now I can look at Errol Spence and say, who was his hardest fight? His hardest fight was a Kell Brook, who was damaged with an orbital bone broken from Triple G, that hard-hitting motherfucker. Or can I say it was Sean Porter, who took him 12 rounds and he knocked him down. You know, Sean Porter, all, you know, football tactics and headbutts and elbows and, you know what I'm saying, he gave Errol Spence a run for his money. Or can I say it was a Danny Garcia? Danny Garcia, who knocked out Adrian Granados, who fought 4 southpaws, who beat Ivan Redkach. Now, I have to say, in my opinion, the toughest fight I've seen Errol Spence against was with Sean Porter. But the toughest fight of his career so far was against Danny Garcia because of the car accident. People want to glaze over. If you're not an Errol Spence fan, you want to glaze over the car accident and say, oh, it was just a car accident. It was staged. Or he wasn't that hurt. Or who was Danny Garcia? Danny Garcia, he's not a top. Danny Garcia is a top 5 welterweight, world class welterweight. Agitas Kovalevskis is tough, strong, built tough. He came into that fight with a half a tank of gas. The Mean Machine had a half a tank of gas, period, point blank. Now ask yourself this: whether you think Danny Garcia is world class or top 5, or he only was great at 140 and wasn't that great at 147. Ask yourself this: Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia, and Terrence Bud Crawford versus Agitas Kovalevskis. Who looked more vulnerable? Who looked more vulnerable in their fight? When you're talking about Errol Spence coming off a car accident, fighting a top 5 welterweight in Danny Garcia, who was on a win streak, who knocked out Granados, who defeated Ivan Redkach, and only had 2 losses controversial against Sean Porter and Keith Thurman. That was close. So Danny Garcia versus Errol Spence. How did that fight play out? Was there any point in time where Errol Spence looked like he was vulnerable or exposed or in hot water? How did that fight play out? How many levels did you see Errol Spence even have to go to beat Danny Garcia? Because from what I saw, Errol Spence never even had to go into a second gear. And we know he can go into a second and third gear because he went into a third gear with Kell Brook. He went into a third and fourth gear with Sean Porter. We only seen Errol Spence. He stayed in 1 gear with Mikey Garcia. He stayed in 1 gear with Danny Garcia. Now, when I look at Terrence Bud Crawford, when he fought against Agitas Kovalevskis, who of course nobody knew his name and all that, but I don't care. When I seen Agitas Kovalevskis, I went and did as much research on Agitas Kovalevskis as possible. And to me, he looked like a formidable opponent with some power. He came up short somewhat in a draw against Ray Robinson. So you saw what he was bringing to the table. Power, but straight up and down, no special effects, and not a whole lot of artillery. But he has some decent power, decent pop. He could put you down. And you've seen Terrence Bud Crawford try to walk through him. And you've seen Terrence Bud Crawford have some struggles the first round. Took some shots, some flush, hard shots the second round. Took some good, clean shots the third round and went down. Took some, started to turn the tides a little bit in the 4th round. And in the 5th round, you've seen Agitas Kovalevskis was still in the fight. Past that 6th round and on, you've seen total domination from Terrence Bud Crawford. He had his way with him. He beat him down from pillar to post and stopped him. Ultimately broke him down and stopped him. But you can see that Agitas Kovalevskis didn't have those gears, and he didn't have that gas tank. You seen when his power faded off. You seen when he had gave his best shot, put a feather in his cap, and took a moral victory and just giving him a tough fight, and you seen him start to fade off. He had no more answers. You seen when Terrence Bud Crawford had to level up at least twice. He had to go through at least 2 or 3 gears before he was able to dispatch Agitas Kovalevskis. So when I look at Errol Spence coming off of a layoff, coming off of an accident, going through rehab, getting new teeth, fighting a dangerous opponent, not the most dangerous person in the world, but fighting Danny Garcia, and staying in 1 gear and basically dispatching his opponent with the jab. And I look at Terrence Bud Crawford having to go through different gears and looking vulnerable in stages and getting knocked down and taking clean shots from Agitas Kovalevskis. Then I lean towards Errol Spence in that fight. Now I know that Terrence Bud Crawford wouldn't fight Agitas Kovalevskis the same way he'd fight Errol Spence. I know we'll see a better version of Terrence Bud Crawford. That's why I say I don't know who will win. Let the best man win. But when I'm looking at it from a logical point of view, and I'm not jumping into, you know what I'm saying, Alice in Wonderland, and I'm not jumping into the damn Wizard of Oz, and I'm just looking at the reality of it in the welterweight division, what will we see from Agitas Kovalevskis versus Sean Porter? What would we see with Jeff Horn versus Danny Garcia? What will we see with Amir Khan versus Mikey Garcia? What will we see with the Kell Brook version that fought Errol Spence against the Kell Brook version that fought Terrence Bud Crawford? Terrence Bud Crawford, what would we see if he fought Danny Garcia? What would we see if he fought Sean Porter? Now, I think that Terrence Bud Crawford fighting Danny Garcia, he would win with Danny Garcia. But it wouldn't be the same victory that he had over Agitas Kovalevskis or Amir Khan. I think Terrence Bud Crawford fighting Sean Porter, I think Terrence Bud Crawford beat Sean Porter. But he wouldn't beat him the same way he beat Amir Khan or Jeff Horn or Agitas Kovalevskis or Benavidez. It'd be a tougher fight. Iron sharpens iron. Cotton just makes it shine. And I've seen Terrence Bud Crawford face cotton opponents in the welterweight division. Other than that, he's accomplished. He's a champion. He's definitely high on the pound for pound list on anybody's list. And I would love to see the fight. If he wouldn't fight Yordenis Ugas, I think that makes the Spence fight closer, very, very much more arguable 50-50, because I still think, you know, the arguable and debatable that it could be 50-50 now. As a warrior, as a gladiator who wants to see the fight, I say make it 50-50, make the fight, man. But still using your brain, using your logic, understanding that is more to it than just the boxing aspect. Errol Spence going to go fight Yordenis Ugas, that's a chess move. That's him sharpening his tools even more. And if he gets that fight, I would suggest to Terrence Bud Crawford, he should go take Sean Porter, and Sean Porter would better prepare him for Errol Spence. Give him more leverage, give him more of a leg to stand on to even debate. Even if Errol Spence gets those 3 belts, if Terrence Bud Crawford fights Sean Porter and beats him way better than Errol Spence beats him, then he's still going to have a lot of support in arguing and negotiating that fight and keeping it balanced, not keeping it, 70-30. And that's another thing I got to say real quick before I get out the way. When Terrence Bud Crawford says something like, man, I would have whooped, Sugar Ray Robinson's butt. Look, this could be a whole nother video for a whole nother day. But I agree with Terrence Bud Crawford. If Terrence Bud Crawford fought Sugar Ray Robinson, he would destroy Sugar Ray Robinson. Mike Tyson would have destroyed Muhammad Ali. Everybody wants to say that these fighters today are the weakest generations of fighters. Au contraire. Now, I love the old school fighters. But I'm talking about logic. I'm talking about the way things get better over time and get worse over time, but being realistic. I'll put it like this so that I don't go to a whole nother video. When people start arguing the greatest of all time, and when people start talking about taking a fighter from just this generation and fighting him against, the best of the old generation, they do it the wrong way. Like if I take Terrence Bud Crawford and I just pluck him out of this present day and time, and he goes fight Sugar Ray Robinson in his prime, he destroys Sugar Ray Robinson. I'm not talking about just, look, if you take all the advancements in training, in understanding boxing, in weights and supplements, in the fact that Terrence Bud Crawford watched Sugar Ray Robinson fights and watched all these years and years and years of what's happened between Sugar Ray Robinson up until Terrence Bud Crawford. All that knowledge is going into Terrence Bud Crawford, and he's plucked out of this present day and time and placed into the past and placed in front of Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray Robinson will be looking at Terrence Bud Crawford like, what the fuck is that? And like they created this dude in the damn lab. Because things advance over time. If you was to take Sugar Ray Robinson and pluck him out of his time when he's in his prime in the past, and then place him in our time in front of Terrence Bud Crawford, he would look at Terrence Bud Crawford the same way, like, what the fuck is that? And he would get destroyed. Herein lies where this situation is tricky. If you take Terrence Bud Crawford and Sugar Ray Robinson, and they're born in the same time, in Sugar Ray Robinson's time, when Sugar Ray Robinson was one of a kind, and when he was unique, and when he was the original and the first of his kind, and they grew up the same timeline, and then they fight, Sugar Ray Robinson beats the shit out of Terrence Bud Crawford. Because people always want to argue about, is the past better than the present? You know what I'm saying? Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. Is this better than that? Is this athlete better than that athlete from way back in the day? Is basketball changed from when they was playing on the damn basket with the bottom cut out versus what they playing on now? You know, you got these super athletes. Oh, they soft, they soft. No. Some things change for the better. Some things change for the worse. But the more things change, the more they stay the same. Times in the day, back in the day, was harder. My grandfather times was harder. My father times were harder. They were stronger, harder men. They had to go through harder stuff. But if I was to get plucked out of my time frame now, and I still had the same mentality, the same education, the same understanding of life that I've gathered from all of their life up into my life. Like, okay, my grandfather, if he was riding on a horse, or if he was riding on the first car that you had to crank up like this. Yes, if I went back into that time frame, it'll be hard for me to be like, shit, man, you gotta crank this car up just before you drive it. But see, the thing is, I have that knowledge in my mind, so at least when I go back, if I was plucked, hypothetically, if some kind of way you could make this happen, if I was taken out of this time frame, but I was still me with everything I know and put there, I'm going to have all the advantages because of my knowledge, because of understanding where things are in the past versus where they will be in the future. So yes, some things will be harder because it'll be more primal. I'll be like, man, this is hard labor work, but I have knowledge. And I can figure it out, and I can hang with them, and I can do things better because I have an understanding of where things are going to go. If you take my grandfather and pluck him out of his existence and put him into today's world, he's driving, he's going to get on a high, you just throw him in a car. Throw me in the car back then, you got to crank it, and then throw him in the car just now where everything is Bluetooth and all these highways and 10 lane highways and everybody looking at their phone. My grandpa, he wouldn't make it a mile. He would flip out of his mind. It's the same thing with athletes. Like Muhammad Ali in his prime versus Mike Tyson in his prime. Now, Mike Tyson, who studied Muhammad Ali and studied Joe Louis and studied John Jackson, or I'm saying, you studied all the guys from the Jack Johnson, and studied all those guys all the way up to, you studied Rocky Marciano and Jack Dempsey. He studied all these guys, and he's the pit bull monster mentality that Mike Tyson with Gus D'Amato and And Teddy Atlas, all that, and he's big, thick neck, and you put him in the ring with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was taken aback by Joe Frazier. You imagine Muhammad Ali being in front of a Mike Tyson in his prime. Now, if you take Mike Tyson, you take away all that, and you just put, that's what I'm saying, you can't really make those two eras exist. That's why the whole conversation is just pointless, because you cannot take someone out of their era. That's why it's the greatest of that person's time. I don't like the greatest of all time, because it's not the greatest of all times, because all times come with the changes of time, and it's different. So you can't cross compare and say, if you take this fighter and he fought this fighter, who would be the best? It's just a pointless conversation. But you can't just sit there and act like these athletes of today's time aren't better. They are better in certain ways, and they aren't better in certain ways. Some things change for the better. Some things change for the worse. But the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that's all I'm going to say on this long ass video. This is Nocturnal Thoughts, man. Like I said, oh, look, be on the lookout. I'm looking out for Clarissa Shields. I think she's supposed to be fighting against Marie Eve Decor. DeCarry. I think that's going to be a good, solid fight. That's like the male version of Billy Joe Saunders versus Jamar Charlo or something like that. But anyways, man, I salute y'all, man. I appreciate y'all even staying with me this long. I'm gonna go ahead and hit the subscribe button right there. Bink, bink, bink. And y'all stay tuned, man. Y'all subscribe to the channel. Y'all leave a comment. Let me know what y'all think on the subject. I know that was a little, you know what I'm saying, all over the place. But people just trip me out, man. The way people think, they don't want to talk about business, or they don't want to talk, but they don't want to talk about business, but they want to talk about conspiracy theory. You know what I'm saying? They don't want to talk about Terrence Bud Crawford resume in a welterweight division, but they want to criticize Errol Spence, you know, fighting Danny Garcia after a car accident. I just don't understand the warped mentality of how people just can't laser focus in on the reality of the thing. Like, Terrence Bud Crawford has accomplished great accomplishments, and yes, you know what I'm saying, that's realistically, he has a leg to stand on to argue 50-50. But at the end of the day, we know most of that whole 50-50, 60-40 conversation is just mainly ego, being enamored of what you did in the past before you came to the welterweight division. We know you have issues with Bob Arum, and we know that Errol Spence is more of the cash cow, and 60-40 is reasonable. And for you to not just accept that and to say, well, Errol Spence fighting Yordenis Ugas is a duck move, it just defies logic, and it defies common sense. And I'm hearing these things, and I just can't believe that this is what the boxing conversation goes to, where it's just like, come on, man. You got to have an even assessment and just say, you know what I'm saying, facts is facts. If you take, like they say, we want to see the Tommy Hearns Hagler. We want to see the times of when Sugar Ray Leonard fought all those guys, and when the Hands of Stone fought all those guys, and when Tommy Hitman Hearns fought all those guys. But if you ask those guys, like if you really ask Sugar Ray Robinson, not in front of the cameras, in front of the fans, where you feel like he still got to say something to keep his, you know what I'm saying, but ask him one-on-one in a privacy of a private conversation. If you ask Hitman Hermans, if you ask Marvin Hagler, if you ask Sugar Ray Robinson, do they think Errol Spence making a chess move fighting Yordenis Ugas? If you ask them if these fighters, these young fighters trying to get they, you know what I'm saying, bank up, trying to get their generational wealth accomplished, if you ask them what they thought about that and they was being honest, they would say the warrior side of me just wants to see Errol Spence fight Terrence Bud Crawford, and vice versa. But the wise, I done got old and wiser, and I understand business, and I understand the boxing and the politics and economics, and I cannot say anything negative about Errol Spence making the smart move, collecting the belts, getting the leverage, and being a cash cow and demanding 60-40, being the alpha side, not the beta side, being able to choose more than just who takes home the biggest personal lion's share, but being able to choose different, leverages within the fight game itself. Like when Mayweather was saying De La Hoya was the A side, he got to choose the gloves, he got to choose the size of the ring and things of that nature. So, anyways, I'm out. I salute y'all in peace, and a special shout out to Aries Zodiac, man. Still watching your videos, still rocking with you, man. You still putting it down very, very, very heavy. So y'all go subscribe to his channel, and I ain't gonna name all the channels that I watch. I'm gonna give a shout out to Aries Zodiac, and I salute everybody. Hit the subscribe button. I'm out. Peace.